Hello, welcome everyone. This is the final event in a series of Zoom conversations that we've been holding over the past year, exploring different perspectives on the subject of waiting. My name is Amara Antilla, and I am the Senior Curator at the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati. On behalf of the CAC and our co-host, the MIT List Visual Arts Center, I'm very happy to welcome the conveners of this program series, Rit Premnath and Avi Alpert. They are also the co-editors of the independent journal Shifter, which focuses on the intersection of art, critical theory, and experimental writing. So myself and Natalie Bell are working towards two affiliated solo exhibitions featuring Rit, which will open at the CAC and the List Center this fall. And these conversations are being held as a kind of prelude to his solo projects in the year leading up to the exhibitions, as a way to prepare content and think together, also in preparation for the next edition of Shifter. I'd like to start by sharing some housekeeping notes. First of all, welcoming any new attendees and also encouraging you to check out our websites and follow us on social media if you want to learn more about our programs. I also wanted to mention that we're recording these sessions and you can access past events on the CAC and the List's YouTube pages. And following these presentations, we will open things up for a moderated discussion, so stay tuned for that. And we invite you all to contribute your comments and questions using Zoom's Q&A function. So thank you again for joining us, and now I'll hand it over to Avi and Rit, who are going to introduce the series and also tonight's amazing presenters. So thank you.
Thank you, Amara, for the introduction and for hosting us through this. Thanks also to Natalie Bell and Emily and Nick at MIT, and our captioner tonight, Gianna, who will be providing live transcript. And thanks to all of our presenters, both tonight and through this whole series, and to all of you out there for joining us. It's nice to see so many new names and some old friends in the participants list here. So as Amara mentioned, with Rit Premnath, I'm the co-editor of Shifter magazine, and we co-manage these public programs together. For the last 7 years now, we have been combining public programming with Shifter so that we do events ahead of time that generate discussions, and those eventually feed into the final publication that we'll be launching probably in October, when hopefully we may be able to see each other again. It's been, the theme here has been to try to make a community to think through an idea or a set of concerns together. The past few issues have been on, first, the dictionary of the possible, and then on the theme of learning and unlearning, and now waiting. We've been thinking about waiting across a range of domains in our personal lives, in lines, in politics, in nature, and with a range of meanings, from the hope of waiting for good news to the cruelty of waiting for injustice to end. And of course, today, waiting to be in each other's presence again. As we, in these different positions and with different and often cruel differences of position with waiting, continue to wait to meet again, it's been a pleasure to gather over the months with the people here, both new and returning. Tonight, as Amara said, is our final session of the series, but we do hope to continue the conversation in other times and places. For now, I'll turn it over to Rit to introduce tonight's speakers.
Thank you again to CAC and MIT for hosting us. I'm Rit Premnath, and I'm really thrilled about our presenters today. We're going to begin with Rebecca Comay, followed by Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahm. I'm just going to provide a short introduction. Rebecca will speak first, Basel and Ruanne next, and we'll have time for a discussion after. So please, you're more than welcome to start populating the Q&A with comments and questions if you'd like, and Avi and I will moderate that, that discussion. Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahm work together across a range of sound, image, text, installation, and performance practices. Their practices engaged in the intersections between performativity, political imaginaries, the body, and virtuality. Their work investigates the political, visceral, material possibilities of sound, image, text, and sight, taking on the form of multimedia installations and live sound and image performances. The publication, And Yet My Mask is Powerful, is published by Printed Matter. They are recipients of the Open Society Foundation Fellowship for 2020-21 and are artists in residence at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation and Captiva 2021. Their upcoming project, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth, has been released with Dia Art Foundation as part of their artist web projects, and they have an upcoming exhibition at MoMA. So a lot to look forward to. And Rebecca Comay is professor of philosophy and comparative literature, a core member of the literature and critical theory program at Victoria College, and an associate member of the Germanic Languages and Literature Department and the Center for Jewish Studies. Her research interests include Hegel and 19th century German philosophy, theatricality, Marx and Marxism, including Frankfurt School, psychoanalysis, contemporary French philosophy, trauma and memory, iconoclasm and the destruction of art, contemporary art and art criticism, Proust and Beckett. She's currently working on a book on the temporality of deadlines, as well as a project on dramaturgy and dialectics. With that, I'd like to warmly welcome Rebecca Comay.
Thanks. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's really good to be here. I know I have 10 minutes, so I just really want to dwell on 2 points, which may be very, very basic. And for that reason, we're spending a bit of time with. One of them has to do with what we're doing when we look at a clock. And the other is asking the question of who are we waiting for when we say we're waiting for someone or something. The second question was really, it's been on my mind for a long time because I've been teaching Beckett all semester. And of course, this question of waiting for Godot is, who is Godot? Is there a Godot? Who is he? Is he a god, or is he a non-god, or is he nobody, or is he somebody? And it kind of perversely occurred to me a little while ago that maybe we are not waiting for him in the sense of waiting for him to come. Maybe we're waiting for him in the other sense of doing his waiting, that somehow in our waiting, there's always a kind of surrogate waiting where we're taking on someone else's waiting. And that's really just what I wanted to think about. So first of all, the clock. Everybody bashes clock time as the homogeneous, empty time of capitalist modernity, where every instant is indifferent and exchangeable, and that's how work gets done. Time becomes abstract, divided, infinitely measurable, exchangeable, and so on and so forth. But I want to think of the clock in a somewhat different way, and to think about how the clock actually inducts us into not simply indifferent homogeneity, but has a kind of tensile and elastic quality. Heidegger speaks of the span or stretch of time as time having a kind of elastic quality. That when we are in time and experience time, it's because time is somehow distending itself, and we are distending towards something which is coming at us. He doesn't really talk about what happens when you overstretch, or when the elastic frays or gives out, or when it snaps back to hit you, which is kind of what it feels like when you're bashing against a deadline, when time has stretched just to its limit and will stretch no more, which is why it sometimes feels like being up against a wall that is not just there, but is pushing back at you. There's a kind of elasticity. But I wanted to think about how when you look at a clock, you're actually not really seeing what time it is, although it might seem that way. The clock doesn't so much mark time as it interpolates you. The church bell rings to bring you to prayer. The school bell rings, the alarm clock goes off. And it's not the present that it's marking, it's the future that it's opening up. So the so-called clock hand is well named. It's an indexical, it's a pointer, it's summoning you. It's pointing to the time, but it's really you that it's summoning to a time which is marked as being inherently insufficient or untimely. Something's about to happen. Something has just happened. It produces suspense, which is why every image of a clock speaks of a future that is on the verge of coming. This is why the image of the doomsday clock that was, published and made iconic in 1947 as the image of the impending, atomic annihilation, could become so instantly recognizable. It's not time it's marking, it's the countdown, it's the future. And why the ticking of a clock in a movie immediately alerts you to the fact that something's about to happen. A bomb is waiting to go off, or high noon is, about to happen. The clock marks a time as now, but it also constructs time as the time that remains. It's time to do something. It's time for, there's no time for, it's too late for, time is up. So the present time that is marked by the clock, forcibly is anything but present. It's a kind of negative time. It's a time of scarcity or excess. Is either not enough time or too much time. Time is lapsing or lagging or about to expire, which just to say that the present, the much maligned present tense, is anything but a static now. It's rather a time of endurance, a time of waiting, a time which is fundamentally at odds with itself, a time of struggle and a struggle for time, time against time, which is why, to me, the German word for present, Gegenwart, really captures this sense of the present, not only as a time of waiting, warten, the wait, but a kind of counter waiting, a waiting against, a kind of resistant waiting. So that's my first point about clocks. My second point about waiting for Godot and what it means to wait for someone or something. Everybody talks now more than ever of ours as being an attention economy, and attention is waiting. You hear it in French, and you should hear it in the English, in the tension or flexion that is at work there, which is of course true, although it would be more accurate to speak of an inattention economy, since what's been extracted for the most part is precisely your distraction, your inattention, and even negative attention, the skittering from click to click that keeps things going. Someone out there is harvesting your minutes, not just the minutes you're spending, but also the minutes that you're spending waiting or not. And anyone who's ever embarked on that war of attrition known as trying to cancel your cell phone plan has engaged, in precisely this contest about who can hold out longer, who's going to give up first. I read actually somewhere that the workers in the call centers are under instructions to outweigh you, to put you on hold, to hang on until you eventually hang up, and then never get to cancel. And all waiting has a little bit of that quality. It's a war zone where power is played out, where you're not simply doing a job, but being constituted, even negatively interpolated, as a waiting subject when you are put on hold, and so on. But of course, there's waiting and there's waiting, and it's not all the same. If we could have the first slide, that would be great. All right. I think there's a couple of blanks. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. These are people waiting for the new iPhone 2, I think it was. There's a new thing, new to me at least, probably not to you. There's a new app, a new series of apps, TaskRabbit and others, where you can pay people not simply to do stuff, hang your pictures or clean your garden, but you can pay people to wait in line for you, to hold your place. Sometimes, you know, homeless people are hired to stand in line, but there are also now a whole new class of professional line sitters or line standers. You can just flip through a bunch of these apps, actually, if you don't mind. They're all much of a muchness, but you get the point. Just keep on. You can just keep on coming. These are all different ways. And up next, there's this. So you can be both either line skipper if you're the employer, or the line sitter if you're employed, and so on. This is the New York SOLED, same old line dudes who can buy tickets to Hamilton for you. It's disgusting, it's funny, it's very, very expensive actually. But the practice, stop here if you don't mind. The practice actually started in Poland in the 80s during the severe food shortages during the last years of the communist regime, and the practice carried over. So there was a professional line stander whose name was, you can, next slide please, Tadeusz Zak. He's the person at the end there who would stand for, you know, sometimes days in line, and his specialty was waiting in line at hospitals for high demand medical specialists, a job that he eventually lost when hospitals became, you know, moved over to online booking. But by then he had become such a celebrity in Poland that he was apparently hired to play the part of a marionette in Rigoletto, the opera. But there's also there's a more high-end service in Washington for lobbyists. Next slide, and I think it's my last slide. For lobbyists, for nonprofits, for lawyers who want to attend debates in the House or the Senate, or the company sends someone over to Capitol Hill to, you know, to wait to get in. And in March 2012, under Obama, when the Supreme Court was debating, you know, was listening, there was this 3 long days of debates, speeches around the Affordable Health Care Act. There were line standers standing there for 4 days for the state attorney generals, for the lobbyists, for the healthcare experts who were, you know, who were waiting their time to get in there. So this is a special instance of the gig economy, of course. Professional line waiters or surrogate waiters, but in a way it's a hypertrophic instance, and therefore an exemplary instance of all gig work, a kind of reflexive doubling of the gig itself, because gig work, you know, is inherently to be waiting in the first place. That's the part that you're not paid for, to be on the ready, what you're not compensated for. Just being there. So the waiting is the unpaid part. And so the professional waiter, the wait sitter, the wait stander, you know, is waiting doubly, is on hand in order to be on hand to take your place. And this is an extreme case of the gig economy. And I'd like to suggest it's also an extreme case of all work, which is not to blur in any way the distinction between the gig economy and the regular economy, or regular labor, such as it was or is, but just to think about, you know, all work as service work and servitude. That working time is waiting, not simply waiting on, as you know, as our terms, waiter or lady in waiting and all these wait people who serve us suggest, but also waiting for, proxy waiting. Well, I wait for you has two senses. I wait for your arrival, but I also wait in place of you. I wait so you don't have to wait. I serve you, and my service is in doing your time for you. We have a watchman who keeps time so we can sleep. We have the prosthetic weight pieces we call watches in English, which do our watching for us, are waiting for us. So when we watch the clock, one reason it's so excruciating to watch the clock is you're actually watching your double, you're watching your watcher, and that's why it's just so incredibly slow. But waiting, the worker, you know, is not simply giving time. He's waiting. I mean, he himself is the person who waits, who puts off. Hegel sets it up very clearly in the primal scene of work, the so-called master-slave episode, dramatic scene, where the worker is not simply doing the master's bidding, he's essentially producing time. He's creating this future that the master does not have to submit to. The master is the consumer, he eats right away. The slave is the servant, the slave is the producer who produces so the master does not have to wait, but also produces himself as an artifact of his own labor. Hence the delay, the inhibition of desire, the pacing, the timing, the construction of the working body as a body which delays. You time your meals, you put off your breaks, you constitute yourself, as this person in waiting for another. So I'm probably out of time here. I haven't actually been watching the time, so I'm suspecting I'm probably out of it. So I want to pause at this point and just yeah, I just like to think a little bit more. Maybe we can come back to this about what it means to wait for someone for whom one is also waiting. What the quality of that reflexive doubling might consist of. So, okay, that's it.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm going to pass it on to Basel and Ruanne.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to be reading from a work called Postscript, After Everything is Extracted, which is part of a project called May Amnesia Never Kisses on the Mouth, of which the first online iteration commissioned by the Art Foundation can be viewed online at mayamnesia.dir.org. This postscript begins February 2020. After everything is extracted, in the lack, in the negative, in the limb, severed, broken. After everything is extracted, in zero, in sub, in minus, in debt, within, without, withheld, without. Who is here after everything is extinguished? Who is here? One February afternoon, we speak about what it means to be in constant mourning every day. Every day. We mourn another death. We mourn the disappearing land, the severed horizon. We mourn the deterioration of our bodies. We mourn what could have been. We mourn what has been. We mourn that our bodies cannot carry the weight longer. We mourn the fields sprayed with toxic herbicides. We mourn the water wells poisoned with toxic chemicals. We mourn how toxic the breath between us has become. We mourn the lost limb, the lost eye. We mourn the loss, find ourselves in the lack, in the negative. Who is here? It's all tremble. A body in tremble, a voice in tremble. I am, you are, we are all tremble. If only you were here now, Adrian. Who is here? My breath is short and tired. For years now, thinking how to breathe where one can't breathe. How to survive where, when we should have died. Mutations. Last night again, we talk about ourselves as mutating, knowing that in mutation, in contamination, in the negative is where they come undone. But then again, I am exhausted. Here again, after everything is extracted and exhausted. Who is here? We hold breath. We hold. We hold. We hold on and we mourn. Again, again, a land that is vanishing. April in New York. We began writing a text about mourning in February, long before we knew what would happen here. About this now. I can't say more, but that it's all true. I'm surprised our voices don't crack under its resonance. 6 p.m., Majdal, the Dead Sea. They end in dark blue. The sea below us. Her voice cracks. She begins the melody. A bird and then another rest on a stone next to her. Begin to sing, as though this melody has always been here. Not with us, with the land and the sea that is dead. In an arid land they said is dead. The wind is blowing, and her arm goes up and back, in towards her chest, and she nearly breaks under the weight of this gesture, having arrived from Baghdad 30 years ago, to here now at the sea that is dead, at this day end in dark blue. The wind blows harder with every breath, as though the pores of the sea and land they call dead are transmitting times and breaths we don't know anything about. But here, closing at 7 p.m., we feel a tremble that releases our breath, releases us for a few hours, days, minutes, before we are again struggling to catch breath.
We are tremble, in debt, and in doubt. 5 p.m. we play the last video. An old man sits on the floor, leaning in lament. The Hajj next to him cries. 5 a.m. Palestine, April. Jalmoud in the dark looks out to where the light is about to break. I hear the water from the Ain, the one the settlers are stealing. I imagine that soon this whole area will be dangerous for us to be in after they have taken it all. But here now, I watch him watching the light break. 9 p.m. New York, May. All I want is to return to that moment. I sketch it out in my head again and again. It's too late. I watch myself watching him, watching the light breaking. Now here, we are breaking. Again. Yes, again. My body fails me. Maybe I am failing my body, but I know that it remembers what I try to forget, holds what has been erased. We are in the negative. No, we are the negative. How easily we mutate and mourn. How many times have I died? How many times have we died? 6:40 p.m., May 28, 2020, New York. Low clouds hang. This country is on fire. Some things need to burn. 1:40 a.m. Palestine. I know the land is scorched. Still its voice, nearly breaking, hums. How many times have we died? How many afterlives have we lived? We are the negative, undone and unbound. This morning, I remember the earth dug up, the gravestones smashed, splintered like a fractured body. Even our graves are not safe. We mourn that we can no longer mourn. Palestine last September, Haikal in an empty room, sits on the floor, whispers words his own and not his own, words sung in a camp in Jordan, words in Tremble. Now his voice breaks where their voices were unmovable. He loses breath, catches breath, loses breath, catches breath. He loses breath and gives in to the lack. We mourn the limits of our capacity to endure. Another house destroyed as its people stand, watch, breath short. Maybe one weeps, wails, screams with every drill of the bulldozer, as if the stone were their own flesh. And then what? I scroll down on the feed. We mourn the loss of the loss and find ourselves in the lack. Once we said we are in search of a new language. Now we hold on to any form of language we can find to hold these broken parts together, these half breaths, these I don't know if we are living or dying, these I don't know if we want to live or die. Hold breath, sing. One February afternoon, sing. We speak about what it means, sing. To be in a constant state of mourning, hold breath, sing. Every day, sing. Every day, sing. Every day, sing. Every day. Being where you are, being where you should not be, being and breathing, breathing and being. Hold breath, release, hold breath, hold, 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 release. Being where you should not be, being and breathing, breathing and being, breathing and being, being and breathing, in the negative, in the lack, in doubt, in debt, maimed, bruised, broken, broke, returning here, now, on this corner, in this word, that sentence, this rhythm, this silence as tremble.
Thank you. Thanks so much for both of those powerful presentations. I was just thinking about the way Rebecca brought up this notion of waiting for someone, the stuckness of waiting for, and in some ways how that relates to a certain kind of stuck temporality that feels very much a part of your presentations, Basel and Ruanne, and this kind of idea of the tremble, which to me feels like this sensation of being stuck. But before we get to that, I wanted to maybe invite Rebecca to begin, and if you have anything to any initial thoughts about Basel and Ruanne's presentations, and vice versa, and we can, in the meantime, collect some questions from the audience. Thank you again.
My initial thought really is just absolute appreciation and admiration for this beautiful piece. So that's not much of a question, but I just do have to say it's an amazing piece. I have a question. I mean, it's partly a technical question, but I'm sure you have a lot to say about it. I was very, very curious about that last, it was titled Gaza Dance, that last sequence of, you know, sort of shadowy, bleached out figures. What was going on with it? What was the image for one thing, and what were you treating it? What were you doing?
I have to figure out which one of us is going to answer. Should I go? Yeah. Actually, the piece is part of a much larger project that includes a very large archive of that we've been collecting for the last 5 years of just forms of everyday dance and music practices. So this was a video that we found from Gaza that's actually in a wedding, and it's a specific dance that's from there, that it's actually connected to Sufi practices. And you know, we've been actually following a lot of new dance practices that are coming out of Gaza. So that is something that we have been following for a while, and the project is, you know, this is part of a much larger project, and part of it is really thinking about how people are using these rituals to generate space and possibility, and not just survive the moment. You know, so what are people doing to not just simply survive? You know, in a condition where you're sort of between living and dying. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of how we were treating the images, a lot of the images were actually inverted. So there was a lot of this kind of throwing the images into the negative space as well, and working with them in that way, and sort of also embracing that sort of zone of shadows and blurs and distortions, and also really beautiful colors that emerge as well sometimes. Things that it's almost like you can see things better, like you see them, you see under their skin more when you turn it into sort of back into the negative, into almost like the photo negative, but it's not. Yeah, I hope that kind of answers somehow.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one also had the sense of something going on, something being erased, information, like there was a loss of information in a certain sense. So, and at the same time, there was this, as you say, this vividness, which was, yeah, very, very striking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that's sort of, yeah, very much part of it, in the way that we're treating the images, you know. the whole concept is kind of about embracing a certain type of negativity, or if we are in the lack, then what can we do from within this, and sort of moving away from ideas of kind of repair, right? In a way. So yeah, that's the way that we've been working. Kind of trying to.
Is photography then, is the medium of photography really essential to your practice, to your thinking?
Yeah, we're very image based and sound, obviously, but photography and moving image is a huge part of our practice. Absolutely. Yeah.
The negative in photography evokes an older kind of photography also.
Of course, yeah, I know, absolutely.
Also lost.
Yeah, I used to work in dark rooms, and I've had that experience of, working with the actual negative, and then always being fascinated by it as well. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, Ruanne and Basel, in thinking about the way Rebecca, as I understood, talking about the present, spoke about the present as a kind of counterweighting, that there's this negativity, I guess, present in the present. And I wonder if that struck a chord with you.
Bess, I feel like Bess is half asleep. Should I just answer, or?
Just a note to everyone else, Basel's in Palestine, and it's the middle of the night, so he's not, there's a reason why he's falling asleep.
No, absolutely. This it definitely struck a chord in terms of how it struck an interesting chord, because we're trying to take that and sort of move it somewhere else as well. But absolutely, it's also the different ways that we experience time and waiting, and living between New York and Palestine. I definitely, feel that we're like between these registers all the time. But I need to think more about it. But I feel that this, as waiting is always like this negative space, right? That you want to, give to someone else. Someone else should be then waiting for you because you have other things to do with your time. And then what does that mean? It's interesting to think, what does that mean in Palestine when you're in a constant state of limbo, right? It's a kind of perpetual limbo, right? Where time is both very full and very empty. It's full of all these events that are happening, historical events that are happening, but at the same time, your daily life is just in a kind of absolute limbo. So yeah, I often think about, because I'm living here, that those sort of like differences between how we register the experience of waiting, essentially. I don't have a question for Rebecca. I mean, I really enjoyed the talk, and it made me think about that, and I'd like to think about it more. But I don't have a question formulated yet.
Yeah, I think a lot about this, just to get back to Palestine for a minute, and this waiting issue. I mean, not just the interminability of everything,
Yeah,
but and the concrete, which also means concrete time spent at checkpoints, and all the concrete during waiting, as a form of, as a form of power inflicting itself in the most cruel way. But also, I mean, the sense that for a long time, I guess it's no longer quite such a big thing, but holding up, this kind of holding out for something, the two-state solution, or these peace talks, or this kind of chimera, this phantasm of something that supposedly is, being negotiated or being waited for, and how that's, of course, I mean, this artificial future, which is just the biggest entrapment. But I'm wondering how that sense of, that constructed, diplomatically engineered wait, you know,
Yeah.
also factors into these multiple waiting times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, those have kind of been sort of deflated now, to put it lightly. But there was, you know, a whole period of this. I mean, I guess for Palestinians, you're waiting the whole time. You know, you're born into a state of waiting, which is, you know, waiting for, I would say fundamentally how we see it and what we speak about is freedom, your freedom. And what does that mean then? How does that look? That becomes a whole different thing. But, you know, from when you're a child, that's what we speak about, hurriya, right? That's what we, because you feel it so inflicted, right, on yourself and on your body and on the, you know, your daily routines. You want to be free of it. So there's all these kind of also mundane levels. And then, you know, when you enter the kind of peace process and the diplomatic, you know, it becomes like this, you know, almost future tangible time that you're working towards, you know, and it's a kind of like a plan. There's a plan set out with benchmarks, and of course, none of it really happened. But, you know, people were very invested in it for a while. There was, for certain portions of Palestinian society, there was this investment and then this kind of perpetual waiting. And I'm not sure if some people are still waiting. I don't know, maybe we have a very minority of people who are still invested in that. But yeah, there's, you know, I feel now that, you know, for a whole generation, we've moved into a more kind of abstract, sort of virtual time, right? We don't see any horizon on the future. And so we're, you know, but we continue to project a sort of potential, and it gets projected into this virtual space. So we ended up becoming very interested in virtual space in that sense, because there's nothing tangible on the immediate or even like less immediate horizon, really. So, you know, it's interesting, like, you know, what does that do, really? I don't know. That's, yeah.
I have a few questions of my own that I'm going to have to wait to get an answer to. Though I have some kind of a lot of curiosity about what liberation would look like if we kind of take up this idea of waiting for this kind of surrogacy as something that we, you know, that's part of the target here. It's not just trying to overcome waiting, but trying to wait this condition of surrogacy, and what might that suggest about what getting out of that condition looks like, or is there a way out of the condition? But I'm just going to say that because I want to make sure that we have fair time for people putting questions in the Q&A. And we have a couple from, I don't know if I'm going to say Ricky Varghese or Varghese. Two questions for Rebecca, though anyone who would like to take this up, about how might the sense of presence, the now, and of waiting play out in the scene of something like psychoanalysis, terminable and interminable? And then a second question, what happens to waiting in the temporal sense in the context of the at-present middle upper class injunction to work from home when the spatial parameters of where work takes place, home, seems to blur? I'm going to add one more for you, Rebecca. There's a question from anonymous attendee, which is just to talk a little bit more, if you'd like, about waiting and deadlines that we had sort of mentioned. And then there was from Naomi Dines, again, apologies if I'm pronouncing these incorrectly, but for Ruanne and Basel, just commenting on how moving the work is. And if you wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship of the text and the script, and how that kind of, you know, how you're using these different elements, how the composition comes together through the elements, and how that's part of the generation of the meaning of your work. So I just want to put them all, because we're approaching our hour. So I want to put them all out there and allow everyone to take up what you would like, and also continue the conversation.
I can answer the question about the text and the script. So we kind of work in a very improv way, in the sense that we, so sound and music and performance have been a practice, and we try to carry that through, even, I mean, later with image, but then later with research. And then this is why the desktop became such an important element. So where we kind of bring different images, different texts, open different websites, so we kind of doing compositions live on the desktop, and then kind of see what comes out, but we're kind of improvising at the same time. So a lot of the text, I mean, a lot of the sound and the images were kind of sort of done to the text. And then because it was actually manifesting as a website, we had to sort of work in even a more fragmented way than we usually do. So we kind of worked with the developer and kind of saw how the rhythm went and how the text would come in these kind of text boxes and fragments. And so that's how it kind of formally we arrived to sort of this, to what you saw right now. Is there another part to that question, or is that it?
There was another part of the question that maybe was addressed to Rebecca as well about,
Okay.
we've lost the question. I don't know if you remember it, Abu.
Oh, the other part of the question was just kind of also connecting the kind of musical sound of the text itself, the way that functioned as a kind of score.
Yeah, I mean, very, very similarly. Yeah, I mean, the sound. We just played a kind of last clip with in the end with sound, but the whole piece on which is manifested online right now has kind of sounds all the way through. And yeah, I mean, the sound actually with this really followed the text and tried to sort of bring out maybe more abstractly sort of feelings around the text. So more straightforward. And then the voice you hear is actually performances that we've been working on for the last 3-4 years with musicians in Palestine, that actually where we sit down and look at the kind of collection of archival material that Ruanne mentioned earlier that we've been collecting, and we sort of talk to them about it and think about it, and then produce new performances from that, and that's where the voice comes from.
I think was it musical sound of the text, though, the text that we were reading. I think that was the question anyway. Gone over the. Yeah, I would mention that I partially wrote that text while having lost my voice and having severe shortness of breath from like a post-viral condition. And some of the things inside there are actually my vocal exercises that I interweaved into the text. So a lot of it was sort of because the vocal exercises were very rhythmic, actually, a lot of it was following the rhythm of the vocal exercises. And those end up being somehow musical as well. So that whole part with the sing is actually a vocal speech exercise that I had to do to regain my voice. Anyway.
Rebecca, I don't know if you wanted to, I can also reread the questions if you'd like. I don't know if you want to. I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Is there time? Can you summarize quickly one or two of the questions? Because I remember them being great questions. I can't really remember what they were.
We can go a few minutes over, but I'll just pick one at random because it's in my essay here. But what happens to waiting in the temporal sense in the context of the at present middle upper class injunction to work from home when the spatial parameters of where work takes place, home, seem to blur? The other one that came through was just talking a little bit more about deadlines, kind of waiting and deadlines. And then one final one on psychoanalysis and the kind of scene of waiting, interminable and interminable. So your choice of question or continued reflection.
Well, let me just very briefly on the question of working at home, which of course is a burden and a luxury for some of us, and it's of course enabled by those who are not able to work at home, so they can bring us our stuff so we can be in our in our homes, etc. We all know that. One thing it does underscore is just the difference between waiting and waiting, between a waiting, which is actually waiting on someone for someone, doing someone's waiting. But it also underscores that waiting, was always tempted to think that waiting must involve a slowing down of time, and in some way it's about a long time or slowness or sedentariness, and I don't think that's actually the case. I mean, the most frenetic activity, being a deliverer, for example, is waiting. It's not waiting. It's just a different rhythm that waiting can take, that is often overlooked because it doesn't have the kind of languorous beauty sometimes that one associates with simply sitting there. So that's just a very, very brief thing. I want to say about psychoanalysis. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that is one of the great mysteries and paradoxes of psychoanalysis, and one of the things that makes it an impossible profession. In Freud's beautiful summary, as is teaching, as is politics, as it happens. And one of the impossibilities, I think, has to do with the completely incongruent temporalities that are at work. On the one hand, the unconscious is timeless, so there are no chronological markers, there's no chronology, there's no schedule for the cure, there's no, it could go on forever, and in fact, asking when it's going to end is really completely the wrong question, and et cetera, et cetera. So it has an interminability built into it, in that there's no set term. On the other hand, what makes that interminability, even possible, is the very, very, punctuated, rigidly, bureaucratically defined process of the analysis itself, which is, tyrannically ordered by getting there on time and your session being up and your holidays and your weeks and your, that is, for many, the great battle over schedule. So it's, and that's where the interface between, the sort of time, the workaday time of the world, and this kind of endless time of fantasy, that's where things get interesting, in my opinion. There's lots more to say, but thanks for that question. The question of deadlines is not unconnected to all this, but it would be a bigger. It would take more time, I think, than we have right now.
Add a deadline keeping you from answering a question about deadlines. It's, I think, kind of
very
perfect.
Convenient. Yes.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time, but I did want to ask a question that Natalie, our MIT curator Natalie Bell, has for Basel and Ruanne. Now, Natalie says, I would love to hear more from Basel and Ruanne about the idea of the tremble. She says, apart from the stuckness that I spoke about, I also think of the tremble as a result of holding a pose or holding a position so long that your body begins to tremble. And thinking of dance as well, it would be great to hear more about their thinking around this term.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick, but I think there's a lot of different ways in which we're thinking about it. One was that the idea of the tremble really came out during when we were, the piece, we started writing the piece in February and stopped writing in September, I believe. And, we were already writing a piece about mourning before the pandemic, but then we continued to write during the pandemic. And so I think on one level, you know, of course, it's about this, you know, you're in such a, your physical state becomes so tight and so tightened from the anxiety and the uncertainty and just the kind of the immense kind of like fear and pain of that period that also recalls and brings up then other traumas, especially for us, I think, and many other people. And you know, you're in such a tightened state that, yeah, you feel that your body is trembling. But then we were thinking a lot about it in terms of resonance and movement and sound. And also the tremble is something that can be so slight. So it's not a, you know, in terms of sound, it's not this forceful thing, right? It's like a shiver. The trembling can be the way that the wind moves things, right? Or moves plants and they just tremble a bit. So really thinking about tremble as this kind of like imprint that remains even after everything else has been extracted. So how is it that something still remains? And we were thinking about something that is just very much in the minor key, but then it's very physical at the same time, right? It does shake you. It can shake you. And so, yeah, so the idea of the tremble kept coming back in all these different ways. And of course, it has a lot to do with the body, movement, sound. Yeah, things that return. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it makes me, there was a line that I noted from your video that I may have miswritten it, but it's something like, my body holds what has been erased. And I think about that in relation to the tremble, but also of mourning, that there's this aspect of a relation to loss, that which isn't, that maybe is made visible. And which then brings me back to Rebecca's notion of the present, that the present is this sort of, it's always working against like some other sort of time, which is absent or erased or withdrawn. So, but
I can just come in here really quickly. I mean, I was really intrigued by this. The tremble is a vibration, is a movement of return, something, you know, something leaving and coming back. So in a way, it's the embodiment of the kind of movement that you're of loss and return that you're describing, in a sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of putting it. Thank you. Absolutely, it does. Yeah, it's that vibration of the return. What is lost? Absolutely.
so holding that vibration of the return in our minds, I want to thank you all. Thank you, Basel, Ruanne, Rebecca, for this generous and generative conversation. And thanks to everyone who showed up to listen and who showed up over the last 8 sessions. Thanks again to Natalie, Amara, and the MIT and CAC teams for hosting us. And thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right.